My name is Marlene, and I'm 61 years old, and I never imagined the people I loved most would betray me over money. I used to think my life was steady, predictable, safe. My husband, Thomas, and I had built a quiet little world together over nearly 4 decades. He was the kind of man who always kept promises, who handled every bill, every tax document, every practical matter with patience and precision. I was the nurturer, the homemaker, the listener. We complemented each other perfectly, and our son, Daniel, was the light of that world, smart, ambitious, full of confidence that made me proud and terrified in equal measure. When Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack last year, everything that once felt steady turned into a blur. Losing him wasn't just about grief, it was about losing the person who had always understood how to keep the machinery of our lives running. For the first time, I was left facing stacks of paperwork, legal documents, insurance policies, and an empty bed. The house felt too big, the silence too thick. Daniel was the one who stepped in, at first out of what I believed was love. He called me every day, came by with takeout, offered to help sort through Thomas's business records. He had taken over a corporate job a few years back and always had that easy charm that made people trust him. I remember thinking, Thomas would be proud of him for stepping up. He told me not to worry about the details, that he would take care of everything. I wanted to trust him. After all, he was my only child, my flesh and blood. So when he said he needed to look over some of Thomas's company accounts or consolidate a few investments, I nodded and signed wherever he told me to. It never even crossed my mind to question him. But as weeks passed, I began noticing subtle changes. Daniel would drop phrases like our property or our investments when talking about assets that were legally mine. At first, I brushed it off. Grief plays tricks on the mind, and I thought maybe I was being oversensitive. After all, he had lost his father too. Then Naomi, his wife, began joining him for these financial visits. She was polite, distant, always impeccably dressed, and always just a little too confident in tone when she spoke. She'd smile and say things like, "We just want to make sure you're secure, Marlene." Or, "It's good that we're managing this together." The way she said "we" unsettled me. But I stayed quiet. I told myself that family means trust, even when it feels uncomfortable. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after Thomas's funeral, Daniel came by with his laptop and a stack of papers. We were sitting at the dining table where Thomas used to read the newspaper every morning. The air smelled faintly of the coffee I'd brewed out of habit, even though I hardly drank any these days. Daniel looked serious, focused, almost impatient. "Mom," he said, flipping open his laptop, "we should start simplifying things. Dad's accounts are scattered everywhere, and it's easier if we merge assets into a single family portfolio. I'll handle it all. You don't need to stress over it." I nodded slowly, not really understanding what he meant by merge, but trusting that he did. He smiled briefly and typed something into his laptop. Then, out of nowhere, he said it. "It's our money now, Mom. You know that, right?" The words hit me like a slap. I froze, not sure if I'd heard correctly. I stared at him, my throat tightening. "Our money?" I repeated softly. He didn't even look up. "Well, yeah," he said casually. "You and Dad built this for the family. Now that Dad's gone, it's basically ours, mine, Naomi's, yours. We'll take care of it together." I forced a small laugh, hoping he was joking. "It's still my account, Daniel. Your father left everything to me first." He looked up then, his eyes hard and unrecognizing. "Mom, you don't need to get defensive. I'm just saying it's not like you're going to need all of it. We're family, family shares." There was something in his tone that made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe it was just bad phrasing, that maybe he didn't realize how condescending it sounded. But deep down, something inside me stirred a quiet alarm I hadn't felt before. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept looping in my head. "It's our money now." It wasn't what he said it was, how he said it. Calm, certain. As though it were an undeniable truth. I began replaying our recent conversations in my mind. realizing how many times he'd talked about our plans and our investments. When had my son started thinking of my husband's legacy as his property? I tried to shake it off. He was grieving, I told myself. He'd always been driven by ambition. Maybe he just wanted to make sure things were handled properly. But another part of me, the quieter, more cautious part, knew better. That wasn't ambition anymore, that was possession. The next morning, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Thomas's old recliner, the one still indented with his shape. I stared at the framed photo of us from our 40th anniversary. Thomas's smile looked reassuring. Grounding. Almost like he was telling me to pay attention. I whispered out loud, "What should I do, Thomas?" There was no answer. Of course. Just the creak of the house settling around me. But I knew something had shifted. Love, I realized, can blind you to danger, especially when the danger comes wrapped in your own child's voice. I froze, realizing that my son didn't see the inheritance as mine but as his. That sentence echoed in my mind for days. I started noticing things I had ignored before. After Daniel said those words, "It's our money now," something in me shifted. I began paying attention to little details, things that would have slipped past me before. He had always been confident, but now his confidence felt like entitlement. Every time he visited, he seemed to treat my home not as a place he grew up in, but as property he already owned. It started subtly. He took over paying my bills, claiming it was to make things easier. At first, I appreciated it. It felt comforting to let someone else handle the endless paperwork that Thomas had once managed. But soon, I realized that I no longer had access to my own accounts. When I asked for login details, Daniel smiled and said, "Don't worry, Mom. I've got it under control." He began changing small things, moving files from my home office, adjusting the locks, even transferring utilities into joint names. I didn't question it at first. My mind was still clouded with grief, and I trusted my son completely. But then came the moment that made my stomach twist. I overheard him talking to Naomi in the kitchen when he thought I was upstairs. Naomi said, "Once everything's combined, it'll just be cleaner to manage." Daniel replied, "Exactly. She won't even notice once it's done." I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I wanted to believe they were talking about something harmless, but deep down, I knew they weren't. Naomi had always made me uneasy. She was polite in that careful, practiced way that hides true feelings. Every compliment felt rehearsed. Every visit seemed like an inspection. She'd make little comments like, "This house must be hard to maintain at your age," or, "It's good Daniel's taking over. These things can get complicated." She said it all with a smile, but her words carried weight. I started feeling like an outsider in my own life. Jeanette, my best friend, was the only person I confided in. We'd been neighbors for 20 years, and she had known Daniel since he was a boy. When I told her what had been happening, she frowned and said, "Honey, don't sign like anything else until you know exactly what it is." I laughed nervously and said, "Jeanette, it's Daniel. He'd never do anything to hurt me." She gave me a look I'll never forget, half pity, half warning. "Money changes people," she said softly. "Especially when there's a lot of it." Over the next few weeks, I became more observant. I started checking mail before Daniel could collect it. One morning, I found a letter addressed to him from our family accountant. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a note confirming a successful transfer of $75,000 from one of Thomas's business accounts to Daniel's personal account. The date of the transfer matched the week Daniel had been helping me organize finances. My breath caught. I sat at the table, reading the number over and over again, unable to process that my own son had done this without telling me. When I confronted him that evening, he didn't even flinch. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, looking bored. "I told you," he said. "I'm managing the accounts. I moved some money to make things more efficient." "Efficient for who?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "For us, Mom. You keep thinking it's your money. It's not. Dad wanted this for the family." My heart broke at how easily he twisted Thomas's memory into a justification. "Your father left everything to me, Daniel," I said quietly. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Legally, maybe, but morally? You know he wanted to take care of us. I'm just making sure that happens." The conversation ended there because I didn't have the strength to argue. He hugged me before leaving, as though we hadn't just discussed theft cloaked in love. His scent, faint cologne mixed with the smell of my late husband's old aftershave, made me ache. It reminded me of the boy he once was, the one who brought me wildflowers from the backyard and drew crayon pictures that said, "I love you, Mom." But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man whose ambition had turned to greed. Over the next few days, Daniel grew bolder. He began inviting Naomi to sit in during our financial reviews, even though I hadn't asked her to. She'd sip tea and smile, occasionally interrupting to ask about liquidating unnecessary assets. She used phrases like return on investment and long-term gains, as if my home and savings were business ventures instead of pieces of my life. Then, one afternoon, I overheard her say, "Once the title's adjusted, things will be smoother." I didn't understand what she meant, but something inside me screamed to find out. That evening, I went through the desk drawer in my office and realized some of the property documents were missing. The deed to the house was gone. My fingers shook as I flipped through the folders, hoping I had misplaced it. But no, it was gone. When I asked Daniel about it the next morning, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "I took it to get it updated. We're putting everything under joint ownership. It's just paperwork, Mom. Don't stress yourself." For the first time, I didn't just feel uneasy, I felt scared. That night, I called Jeanette and told her everything. She didn't hesitate. "You need to call your lawyer, Marlene," she said. "Right now." Her voice was firm, urgent, and certain in a way mine no longer was. I realized then that my instincts had been right all along. For the first time, I began to question whether I could trust my own son. It all started unraveling when I went looking for Thomas's original will. After my conversation with Jeanette, I couldn't sleep that night. My heart wouldn't stop pounding and my mind kept circling the same thought. If Daniel had already taken the house deed, what else had he touched? I decided I needed to see Thomas's will with my own eyes, just to reassure myself that everything was still as it should be. Thomas had always been meticulous about paperwork. He kept every financial document, every title, every contract filed neatly in a locked safe behind the bookshelf in his study. He used to joke that if something happened to him, I'd find everything there, even the instructions for what to do with the dog, he'd once said with a grin. I knew the combination by heart, but my hands trembled as I turned the dial. When the door opened, I exhaled shakily and began searching through the folders. Insurance documents, business tax returns, bank ledgers, all exactly where they should be. But the envelope labeled Last Will and Testament, Thomas Harper, was gone. My stomach dropped. I shuffled through the papers again, hoping I'd missed it. Nothing. The safe, usually so organized, suddenly felt like a hollow metal void. My breath quickened, and a faint ringing filled my ears. The only person who could have accessed the safe was Daniel. I hadn't told anyone else the combination. I grabbed my phone and called him. It was past 10 at night. But he answered on the second ring. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, sounding slightly annoyed. "Where's your father's will, Daniel? It's missing from the safe." He sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "I took it. I told you I was reviewing the paperwork." "Reviewing? Without telling me?" I could hear my voice trembling. "Mom," he said, his tone turning cold. "You don't need to panic. I'm handling it. You're not thinking clearly right now." That phrase, "you're not thinking clearly," cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't concern. It was control. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where the will used to be. Something inside me broke that night. I realized that I couldn't keep pretending this was just a misunderstanding. The next morning, I called Mr. Callahan, our family lawyer. He'd been handling our affairs for more than 20 years, ever since Thomas first incorporated his business. When I told him the will was missing and that Daniel had taken it, his voice grew quiet. "Marlene," he said, Did you sign anything recently? Anything Daniel asked you to? I hesitated. A few things. Yes. He said they were just financial updates. I see, he said carefully. I think you'd better come to my office today. Bring whatever documents you have. When I arrived, Callahan's face was serious in a way I'd never seen before. His office smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the air thick with unease. He asked me to describe everything Daniel had said or done in the past few weeks. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. Marlene, I received something strange last week, he said. A revised estate authorization document with your signature on it. It gave Daniel full power to manage and distribute your assets. My heart stopped. I never signed anything like that. He nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of. The signature matches yours almost perfectly, but I know your hand, Marlene. This one looked off. I felt dizzy. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the edge of the chair to steady myself. You think he forged it? I whispered. Callahan hesitated, then said, I think we should assume the worst until we know otherwise. The words hit me like a wave of cold water. The thought that Daniel, my own son, might have forged my signature, stolen legal documents, and moved money behind my back was too heavy to bear. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. Callahan poured me a glass of water and said softly, I'll start an inquiry right away. But you need to be careful, Marlene. Don't confront him directly for now. And don't sign anything else, no matter what. On the drive home, I couldn't stop shaking. I kept seeing Daniel's face as a little boy, running up to me after school with a drawing in his hand. I could still hear his laugh, still remember the way he used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. I didn't recognize the man he'd become, the one who could manipulate his own mother for money. That night, I sat at Thomas's desk again, the empty space in the safe haunting me. I thought about all the trust I had handed over, about how easily I'd believed Daniel when he said he was helping. Love, I realized, had made me blind. I called Jeanette and told her everything about the missing will, the forged signature, and Callahan's warning. She was silent for a long moment before saying, You need to protect yourself, Marlene. Whatever this is, it's not love anymore. It's greed. I knew she was right. I went to bed that night. The house quiet and dark around me, but my heart wouldn't rest. My son's words echoed again and again in my mind, twisting into something uglier each time. I realized this was no misunderstanding. My own son was trying to steal from me. I wanted to confront Daniel, but I also didn't want to believe he was capable of this. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness that went beyond exhaustion. It was the kind of weight that pressed down on my chest, making every breath feel earned. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe Callahan was mistaken. Maybe Daniel had good intentions but went about them the wrong way. Mothers, I think, are experts at finding excuses for their children, especially when the truth hurts too much to face. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from the mug. Every memory of Daniel as a boy flooded back: his first piano recital, the way he used to fall asleep with his head on Thomas's lap during family movie nights, the proud smile on his face when he got his first job. How could that same boy, the one I raised with love and care, be capable of stealing from me? Still, Callahan's warning rang in my ears. Don't sign anything. Don't confront him yet. But I couldn't stay silent. I needed answers. That evening, I told him I missed him, that I wanted us to talk. He arrived with Naomi, uninvited but clearly at his insistence. They brought a bottle of wine, acting cheerful and casual, as if everything was perfectly normal. We sat at the table, the conversation polite at first. Naomi complimented the roast chicken, Daniel asked how I'd been sleeping, and for a moment, I could almost pretend we were just a regular family again. But when I brought up the missing will, the tone shifted. Daniel, I began carefully, I spoke to Mr. Callahan. He said you took your father's will from the safe. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. He didn't look surprised, just annoyed. I told you I was reviewing it, Mom. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I also found out about the document with my signature on it. I continued. my voice trembling but steady. The one giving you control over my estate. I didn't sign that. Naomi shot Daniel a quick, panicked glance before forcing a smile. I'm sure there's just some confusion, she said smoothly. You probably signed something else and forgot. I didn't forget, I said sharply. And I want the will back. Now. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. Mom, you're overreacting. You're letting Callahan fill your head with nonsense. I'm trying to help you. You shouldn't be handling these things alone. I'm not alone, I said. I have people who care about me and who can see what you're doing. For the first time, there was silence between us. It stretched like a taut wire, thin and dangerous. Then Daniel smirked. Mom, he said, his tone changing lower, sharper. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You're not exactly young anymore. Wouldn't it be easier to let me manage things? You can relax. Enjoy life. I'll take care of everything. There it was. The truth, laid bare and cold. He wasn't helping me. He was replacing me. Naomi reached across the table and placed her perfectly manicured hand over mine. He's right, Marlene. You've been through a lot. Sometimes it's better to let the next generation handle things. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, but it made my skin crawl. My own son and daughter-in-law were sitting across from me, trying to strip me of everything I owned, all while pretending it was for my own good. I pushed her hand away. Get out, I said quietly. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. What? Get out of my house. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Daniel laughed bitterly. Fine. If you want to make this a fight, Mom, we can do that. But remember, you brought this on yourself. He grabbed Naomi's arm, and they left without another word. The door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the empty house. I sat there for a long time, my hands shaking, staring at the untouched food on the table. My appetite was gone. My heart felt hollow. I didn't recognize the man who had just walked out my door. That night, I packed a small suitcase and drove to Jeanette's house. She opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd been expecting me. I must have looked like a ghost, eyes red, voice trembling, body trembling from exhaustion and disbelief. She didn't ask questions, she just pulled me into a hug. You're staying here tonight, she said firmly. No arguments. When I told her everything, she listened without interrupting. By the time I finished, she shook her head. You need to protect yourself legally. This isn't just about family anymore, it's about your safety. I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. I can't believe it's come to this. Jeanette squeezed my hand. You raised a son. You didn't raise a saint. Don't confuse the two. Her words hurt because they were true. The next morning, I called Mr. Callahan again. He promised to start formal proceedings to secure my accounts and investigate Daniel's actions further. His tone was gentle but firm, like a man who knew we were standing at the edge of a storm. That night, as I sat in Jeanette's guest room, staring out at the streetlights flickering in the dark, I realized that the battle ahead wouldn't just be about money. It would be about love, memory, and the very meaning of family. As I stared out of Jeanette's guest room window, I realized I might have to fight my own flesh and blood in court. What Callahan found next made my stomach turn. After I'd moved into Jeanette's guest room, my life fell into a strange rhythm of fear and paperwork. Every morning I'd wake up before dawn, sit by the window with a cup of tea, and wait for Mr. Callahan's call. I couldn't go back home yet, not until we knew exactly what Daniel had done. My house no longer felt like mine. The thought of him walking through those rooms, handling my papers, touching Thomas's things, it all felt like a violation. A few days later, Callahan called and asked me to come into his office again. His tone was serious. When I arrived, he had a folder already waiting for me on the desk. He didn't waste time. Marlene, he said, opening the folder. I found several irregular transactions from your late husband's company account. Each transfer went directly into Daniel's personal account over the last 3 months. I leaned forward, my hands cold. How much? About $240,000. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a mistake. This was theft calculated, deliberate, and cruel. Callahan slid over some printed bank statements. Each line was like a punch to the chest. The first transfer had been right after Thomas's funeral. The last one had occurred the week before Daniel and Naomi stormed out of my house. But that wasn't the worst part. Callahan then handed me a printout of several emails. These were sent to me from your email address, he said. But I know they didn't come from you. I looked at them. Every message was polite and professional, each authorizing Daniel to handle financial transfers and sign in my place. My name sat neatly at the bottom, typed out, looking so innocent. I didn't send these, I whispered, feeling the room tilt. I know, Callahan said. They came from an IP address linked to Daniel's home network. It was like being hit with a truth I didn't want but could no longer deny. My son had forged my digital identity, manipulated my accounts, and stolen his father's hard-earned money, and he'd done it without even flinching. My voice cracked as I said, "He planned this." Callahan nodded grimly. "Yes. For months, maybe longer." I pressed a hand over my mouth, trying to hold back tears. "What do we do?" "We freeze all existing accounts connected to you and the company," he said firmly. "That will stop him from moving anything else. I'll file an injunction in court to block him from touching your assets." He handed me a packet of documents to sign. "These are legal protections. This time you'll sign them here in front of me. No copies, no confusion." When I signed the last page, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief, like I was finally taking control, but at the cost of everything I thought I knew about family. Later that afternoon, when Daniel discovered the freeze on the accounts, the nightmare escalated. He showed up at Jeanette's doorstep, pounding on the door like a storm. I was sitting in the living room when I heard him shouting my name. His voice wasn't calm anymore, it was desperate, angry, and cruel. I went to the window and saw him standing there, his face red, his eyes wild. Jeanette stood beside me, whispering, "Don't open the door." But I couldn't just hide. I stepped closer to the door and said, "Daniel, you need to leave." "Leave!" he shouted. "You froze everything, Mom. You're embarrassing the family. Do you even know what you're doing?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You stole from me." He laughed bitterly. "Stole? You're losing it. I was protecting what's ours. Naomi and I have bills to pay, debts to clear you wouldn't understand." That's when the truth spilled out. He'd taken out large loans under his name, and had been drowning in debt for years. He'd been using Thomas's business accounts to cover it up, moving funds to keep himself afloat. He pointed a finger at me through the window. "You're ruining everything. I was trying to save us." "Save us?" I whispered. "By lying? By stealing?" Jeanette called the police quietly, her hand trembling on the phone. When Daniel saw her through the glass, he shouted, "You're siding with her now? This is insane." Then he slammed his fist against the porch railing and stormed off to his car, tires screeching as he sped away. I collapsed into the armchair, shaking. Jeanette wrapped her arms around me. "He's lost, Marlene," she said softly. "This isn't your fault." But I couldn't stop crying. It was my fault, wasn't it? I'd raised him. I'd given him everything. How could he turn into someone who saw me as an obstacle instead of a mother? The police came and took a report, promising to patrol near Jeanette's home for a few nights in case he returned. Callahan advised me to change all my passwords, phone numbers, and security details immediately. The next few days blurred together lawyers, phone calls, paperwork, fear. I couldn't step outside without feeling watched. And yet, beneath all the terror and betrayal, one truth burned clearer than ever. This wasn't just about money, this was about power. Daniel wanted control of me, of the legacy, of everything Thomas and I had built. As I sat in Jeanette's living room, clutching a photo of my husband. I whispered, "Thomas, I'm so sorry. I should have protected what we built better." The house was silent, but in that stillness, I felt a flicker of strength return. Love had made me blind, but betrayal had opened my eyes. He stormed off, vowing that I'd regret turning against him. The next morning, I got served with my own son's petition for conservatorship. When I saw the envelope on Jeanette's porch, I thought it was another update from Mr. Callahan. The heavy legal seal on the front made my stomach twist, but nothing could have prepared me for what was inside. The papers claimed I was mentally unfit to handle my finances due to age-related decline and emotional instability following bereavement. Daniel had filed to become my legal conservator. My own son was trying to take full control of my assets under the pretense of protecting me. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My hands shook so badly that the papers fluttered from my fingers to the floor. Jeanette picked them up and started reading, her mouth falling open in disbelief. "He's saying you're not competent?" she said, her voice trembling with outrage. I could barely whisper. "He's trying to make me legally powerless." When I called Callahan, he wasn't surprised. "I suspected he might take this route," he said grimly. "It's a common tactic when money's involved. He's hoping to convince the court you're incapable of managing your estate." My throat was dry. "But I'm not. I'm fine." "I know that, Marlene," he said gently. "And we're going to prove it." Over the next week, my life became a blur of meetings, affidavits, and witness statements. Callahan worked tirelessly, but the emotional toll was crushing. I'd gone from a grieving widow to a woman preparing to defend her sanity against her own child. We gathered evidence: the forged signatures, the unauthorized transfers, the fake emails. Every document was like another knife in my heart, proof that my son had been planning this deception for months. But Callahan reminded me that evidence alone wasn't enough. "We need people to testify," he said. "Friends, neighbors, anyone who can vouch for your mental and emotional state." Jeanette volunteered immediately. "I'll stand by you every step of the way," she said firmly. My neighbor Carol, who'd known me since Thomas and I moved in, also agreed to testify. Even Thomas's old accountant came forward, providing proof that Daniel had altered company ledgers without authorization. The support comforted me, but it didn't erase the ache in my chest. Every time I looked at Daniel's name on those legal papers, I felt a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. Naomi's name appeared too. She'd co-signed several affidavits supporting his claim that I was showing signs of confusion and irrational decision-making. Reading that made my blood run cold. The woman who used to kiss my cheek at Sunday dinners was now helping build a case to strip away my independence. One night, I couldn't sleep. I sat awake in Jeanette's living room, staring at the clock as it ticked toward midnight. Jeanette came out in her robe, rubbing her eyes. "You need rest," she said softly. "I can't," I whispered. "What if they believe him? What if the court thinks I'm not capable?" She sat beside me and took my hand. "Then we fight harder. You've survived worse, Marlene. You can survive this too." Her words became my anchor. When the court date arrived, I dressed in the navy blue suit Thomas had always loved. I wanted to look strong, capable, unbreakable, even though I felt like a child walking into a lion's den. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish, and every step down those long corridors echoed louder than the last. Daniel was already there with his attorney. He didn't even look at me when I entered. Naomi sat beside him, perfectly composed, her expression unreadable. Callahan guided me to our table, whispering, "Stay calm. We'll let the evidence speak." As the hearing began, Daniel's lawyer painted a cruel picture of me, a grieving widow, disoriented and overwhelmed, easily manipulated by opportunistic acquaintances. He claimed Daniel was simply stepping in to protect his mother's interests. It felt like listening to a stranger describe someone else. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, but Callahan squeezed my hand under the table. "Wait," he murmured. When it was our turn, Callahan's voice was calm but firm. He presented the forged documents, the altered ledgers, and the emails Daniel had sent from my account. He walked the judge through every transaction, every falsified signature, With each piece of evidence, Daniel's composure began to crack. Jeanette testified next. She spoke from the heart, describing my clear-headedness, my independence, and the way Daniel had slowly isolated me under the guise of helping. Her voice shook at times, but her conviction never faltered. Carol followed, confirming how Daniel had taken over the household accounts immediately after Thomas's funeral and refused to let me handle my own affairs. Finally, Thomas's accountant testified that Daniel had used company funds to pay off personal credit cards. That revelation sent a murmur through the courtroom. Through it all, Daniel sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the table. Naomi avoided eye contact, her hand trembling slightly as she scribbled notes. When the judge adjourned for the day, Callahan told me we were in a strong position but that we'd need to prepare for a drawn-out process. "He's not going to give up easily," he warned. That evening, as I sat in Jeanette's kitchen, the weight of everything finally crashed down. On me. The son I'd once trusted with my life was now treating me like an adversary. I looked at Jeanette and whispered, "This isn't about money anymore, is it?" She shook her head slowly. "No, Marlene. It's about control." I understood then that even if I won this case, I'd never truly get my old life back. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal. It just leaves scars. Still, I had no choice but to fight. This was no longer about fear or love, it was about dignity. And I wasn't about to let anyone, not even my son, take that away from me. I told myself this wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my dignity. Walking into that courtroom felt like walking into a funeral, only this time, it was for my family. The hearing resumed a week later. By then, the weight of everything had settled deep in my bones. I hadn't slept more than a few hours each night, waking constantly from dreams where Thomas was still alive, warning me to be careful. I'd wake up crying, whispering apologies into the dark, promising him I was trying my best to protect what we built together. When I arrived at the courthouse, the air was cool and sterile. People whispered softly in the hallway, the faint rustle of papers filling the silence. I saw Daniel standing near the front, his suit pressed, his expression calm but cold. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look my way. Naomi stood beside him, perfectly composed, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Mr. Callahan met me at the door. "Remember," he said, his tone low but steady. "The truth is on our side. Let it speak for itself." We took our seats as the judge entered the courtroom. The sound of the gavel striking wood made my heart skip. Daniel's attorney began with his opening statement, painting me as a grieving, confused widow, incapable of managing the financial complexities Thomas had left behind. He spoke with confidence, describing Daniel as a devoted son who had stepped up during a time of crisis. Every word felt like an assault on my character. When it was Callahan's turn, he stood and delivered a calm but powerful rebuttal. "What this case is really about," he said, "is not confusion or incapacity but deception. It's about a son who used his mother's grief to seize control of her estate." His words echoed through the room, and for the first time, I saw Daniel's jaw tighten. Callahan called me to the stand. My legs felt weak as I stood, and for a brief second, I thought I might faint. But then I looked toward Jeanette sitting in the gallery, her hands clasped in silent support, and I found strength. The clerk swore me in, and I took my seat at the witness stand. The microphone amplified every small sound, my breathing, the trembling of my voice. Callahan began gently, asking me to describe the months after Thomas's death. I told the court how Daniel had offered to help with finances, how I'd trusted him completely, and how, slowly, he had taken over everything from passwords to property deeds. I described discovering the missing will, the forged documents, the unauthorized transfers. I spoke about the night he came pounding on Jeanette's door, screaming that I had ruined his life. As I spoke, Daniel kept his eyes down, tapping his thumb against the table, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. When Callahan finished, Daniel's attorney stood. His approach was different, calculated, almost mocking. "Mrs. Harper," he began. "You've been under a lot of emotional stress since your husband's passing, haven't you?" "Yes," I said. "But grief doesn't make me incompetent." He smiled faintly. Of course. But would you say your emotions sometimes affect your judgment? No more than they would for anyone else who's lost someone they love. He flipped through his notes. Isn't it true you've made errors before? For instance, signing documents without reading them? I took a deep breath. Yes, I trusted my son. And yet you now claim he deceived you? Yes, I said firmly. Because he did. The courtroom was silent. The lawyer smirked, clearly not expecting my resolve. When Naomi took the stand, her confidence faltered. She tried to defend Daniel's actions, saying he was just trying to protect the family assets. But under cross-examination, Callahan asked a single question that changed everything. Mrs. Harper, he said, his tone sharp but polite. Did you notarize any of the documents transferring ownership of your mother-in-law's assets to your husband? Naomi hesitated. Yes, but, so, you were both witness and beneficiary? Her voice cracked. Daniel said it was fine. The judge's expression hardened. You could feel the shift in the air. Naomi's composure crumbled, and she avoided looking at Daniel. He glared at her, furious, as if she had just ruined everything. When she stepped down, Callahan rested his hands on the table and whispered, "That was the crack we needed." After both sides gave their closing remarks, the judge announced that a ruling would be delivered in 1 week. The sound of the gavel closing the session felt final, yet unresolved like an unfinished sentence. I stood to leave, my knees weak, my breath shallow. As I turned toward the door, Daniel brushed past me. His shoulder hit mine not hard, but with just enough force to send a message. He leaned close enough for me to hear him whisper, "You'll regret this." His voice was low, venomous, and full of hatred I never thought I'd hear from my child. For a moment I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. Jeanette rushed to my side, wrapping an arm around me. "He can't hurt you anymore," she whispered. But I wasn't so sure. That night, I went back to her house and sat awake until dawn, replaying every word, every look, every memory of my son. I realized that no matter how the court ruled, something precious had already been destroyed. The bond between us, the quiet, unspoken love that once defined our family had been shattered. As I left the courtroom, Daniel whispered, "You'll regret this." The waiting was the hardest part, days stretched into sleepless nights. After the court hearing ended, time seemed to lose its rhythm. Every day felt like an echo of the one before. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator in Jeanette's kitchen. I found myself glancing at my phone every few minutes, hoping for a call from Mr. Callahan with the verdict, but it never came. The silence left too much room for thought. I replayed everything in my head, the look in Daniel's eyes, Naomi's trembling voice, the way the judge's expression had changed when the truth started coming out. I should have felt hopeful, but instead I felt hollow. Winning would mean justice, yes, but it also meant admitting that my own son had tried to destroy me. Jeanette kept me company as best she could. She cooked meals I barely touched, made tea I let grow cold, and reminded me to sleep when the sun came up. "You can't fall apart now," she told me one morning, sliding a plate of toast across the table. "You've come too far." "I just want this to be over," I whispered. "I want to wake up and have it all be a nightmare." But it wasn't a nightmare. It was my life. "Mr. Callahan called occasionally to update me. He said the judge was reviewing all the financial evidence carefully and that things looked very strong on our end. But legal processes take time, and time had become my enemy. I started journaling just to stay sane. Every night, I wrote letters to Thomas, letters I'd never send, never read aloud, but needed to write. I told him about the trial, about Daniel's lies, about how much I missed the safety of his voice. Writing became my only way to breathe. The stress began to affect me physically. My hands shook when I tried to pour tea. I lost weight. I'd wake up in the middle of the night certain that I'd heard footsteps outside the house, only to find nothing there. Then, one afternoon, as I sat by the window, a message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. It said, "Drop the case, Mom. You don't want to make this worse for yourself." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over again. I knew that tone. It was Daniel's. He'd changed his number, but the phrasing, the way he called me Mom but followed it with a threat, was unmistakable. I showed the message to Jeanette, and she immediately called Mr. Callahan. He advised us to report it to the police, and I did. They logged it as harassment and suggested I consider getting a restraining order. I couldn't believe it had come to that. A restraining order against my own son. That night, I double-checked that every door was locked, every curtain drawn. I slept with my phone on my chest, afraid of what might happen if I didn't hear it ring. I barely went outside. Jeanette tried to keep my mind busy by watching old movies or working on puzzles, but nothing could distract me for long. Every creak in the house made me flinch. Callahan called again a few days later. "We're almost there," he said. "The judge has asked for a final review of the property documents. Once that's done, she'll issue the verdict." My heart pounded. "How long?" "A few more days, maybe a week," he replied. "Try to rest, Marlene." But rest was impossible. I spent hours pacing the guest room, staring out at the empty street below. Even Jeanette began to look worried. "You're not eating," she said one morning. Her brow furrowed. "You'll make yourself sick." "I can't stop thinking about him," I admitted. "He's my son. He's sitting somewhere right now, angry at me, maybe hating me, and I don't even know if he realizes what he's done." Jeanette sighed. "Maybe one day he'll understand, but right now you have to protect yourself." She was right, but it didn't make it easier. Every time I looked at Daniel's old photos, his graduation picture, his wedding portrait, I saw two people. The boy I'd raised and the man who betrayed me. A few nights later, the phone rang around midnight. I jolted upright, heart pounding. It was Mr. Callahan. "Sorry to wake you," he said. "The court clerk just notified us there's been a delay in the ruling due to a backlog." I felt tears sting my eyes. "So I keep waiting?" "Yes," he said gently. "But you're almost through this. Don't lose faith." I hung up and sat in silence, the darkness pressing in. Outside, rain had begun to fall soft at first, then heavier, splattering against the window in relentless rhythm. Suddenly, a sound broke through the storm, a faint scraping noise near the back door. My stomach clenched. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and crept down the hall. When I peeked through the kitchen window, I thought I saw a shadow move near the fence. I froze, breath shallow. The light flickered, catching a glimpse of movement, then nothing. I called out softly, "Who's there?" But there was no answer. The next morning, Jeanette found muddy footprints near the back steps. The police came again. Said it could have been an animal, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. Something told me Daniel was losing control. That day, I packed a small bag, ready to stay somewhere else if I had to. Jeanette put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You're not running from him. You're standing up to him. Remember that." I realized I might not just be fighting for money but for my safety. It happened on a stormy night. I'll never forget the sound of the door pounding. The storm had rolled in fast that evening. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain beat against the windows like angry fists. Jeanette had gone to visit her sister across town, leaving me alone in the house for the night. She'd asked if I wanted to go with her, but I insisted I'd be fine. After all, we'd taken every precaution. The police were aware of the situation, and I'd changed all the locks. I told myself I wasn't afraid anymore, but that was a lie. By 10 o'clock, thunder was shaking the walls. I tried to distract myself by reading, but every crash of lightning made me flinch. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and went to bed, praying for the storm to pass. That's when I heard it. A heavy pounding at the front door. At first I thought it was the wind, but then came a voice, muffled but unmistakable. "Mom, open the door!" My blood ran cold. I froze in place, heart hammering in my chest. It was Daniel. His voice was raw, urgent, nothing like the polished tone he used in court. He pounded again. Harder this time. "Mom, I know you're in there. We need to talk. I didn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. The rain drummed against the roof, masking the sound of my shaky breathing. Mom, please, he said, softer now. I just want to talk. I swear, I just need to explain. I crept down the hallway, stopping a few feet from the door. Through the peephole, I saw him standing on the porch, drenched from the rain. His hair clung to his forehead, his suit jacket dark and soaked. There was a wildness in his eyes I'd never seen before, a mix of desperation and fury. Go home, Daniel. I called through the door, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, pressing a hand to the glass. Please. I messed up, okay? But you don't understand what I was dealing with. I understand more than you think, I said quietly. You lied to me. You forged my name. You stole from your father's company. He slammed his fist against the door, making me jump. I had to. You don't know what it's like being buried in debt, watching everything slip away while you sit there doing nothing. His words stung. But what cut deepest was the way he said you. As if I were the enemy. You could have come to me, I whispered. I would have helped you. But you didn't ask, you took. He ran a hand through his wet hair. Pacing. Naomi pushed me. Okay? She said we needed to get control of things before you wasted it all. I thought I was doing the right thing. His voice cracked, and for the first time, I heard a trace of the boy I used to know, the boy who used to cry when he broke something and ran to me for comfort. My heart ached, but I couldn't let that part of me, the mother who always forgave, take over now. Not this time. Daniel, I said, forcing my voice steady. You need to leave. This isn't the way to fix things. He shook his head violently. You don't get it. Once the judge rules, I'm finished. Everything's gone, my reputation, my job, everything. You did that to yourself, I said softly. I tried to protect you, and you destroyed that trust. The rain grew heavier, soaking him completely. He pressed both hands against the door now, his forehead resting against the glass. Please, Mom, just drop the case. We can work this out privately. No one has to know. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I stayed firm. No, Daniel. I can't. Something inside him snapped. His voice rose again, shaking with anger. You think this makes you strong? You think you're teaching me a lesson? You're ruining everything. He kicked the bottom of the door, and I screamed. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My son is trying to break into the house, I told the operator, my voice shaking uncontrollably. As I waited for the police, I shouted through the door, Daniel, stop! The police are coming. That made him pause. For a few seconds, all I heard was the sound of rain and thunder. Then he laughed. A broken, bitter laugh that chilled me to the bone. You'd call the cops on your own son? He shouted. You stopped being my son when you started treating me like your enemy. I whispered. There was silence. Then I heard his car door slam, the roar of his engine cutting through the storm as he sped away. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, the officers found muddy footprints all over the porch and fresh dents in the door. One of them took my statement while the other checked the property. They promised to keep a patrol nearby for the next few nights. After they left, I collapsed on the couch, shaking from head to toe. The adrenaline faded, leaving only sorrow behind. I cried until my throat ached. When Jeanette returned the next morning and saw the damage, she was furious. He could have hurt you, Marlene. You should have stayed with me. I thought he'd calm down, I said weakly. I didn't think he'd come here. Before we could say more, my phone rang. It was Callahan. His tone was grim. Marlene, he said. I just got word from the police. Daniel's been arrested. Arrested? I repeated. Stunned. Yes, he said. He was caught breaking into your old house late last night. The neighbors saw him and called it in. I sat in silence, tears welling in my eyes. Part of me felt relief, but another part broke completely. My son, my only child. was now sitting in a jail cell because of what he'd done to me. Jeanette squeezed my shoulder gently. He made his choices, she said softly. But no matter how much I told myself that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had died right alongside my trust. The next morning, I learned Daniel had been arrested for property tampering after trying to break into my old house. When Judgment Day came, I could barely breathe. The morning of the verdict, the sky was overcast, a dull gray that seemed to press down on everything. The air was thick with anticipation. Jeanette drove me to the courthouse, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Neither of us spoke much on the way there. Every traffic light, every turn, felt heavier than it should. When we arrived, Mr. Callahan was already waiting for us in the lobby, his face calm but unreadable. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though my legs felt like they could give out at any second. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat beside his lawyer, looking thinner and more worn than I remembered. His hair was unkempt, and his eyes had dark circles under them. Naomi wasn't there. She had vanished after his arrest, distancing herself from the chaos she'd helped create. The room was tense. Even the faint rustle of papers seemed loud. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I clutched the edge of the table, my knuckles white. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. The judge began reading through the findings. Her tone was even, deliberate. But every word carried the weight of months of pain and fear. After reviewing the evidence, including the forged financial documents, unauthorized transfers, and false statements made under oath, this court finds that the petition for conservatorship is denied. A quiet gasp escaped my lips. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't dare move. I needed to hear the rest. The court further determines that Mr. Daniel Harper knowingly engaged in fraudulent activity and financial misconduct. Therefore, restitution is required for all misappropriated funds. Additionally, this matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for criminal proceedings. Daniel's attorney whispered something to him, but Daniel just stared straight ahead, expressionless. His face was pale, his jaw locked tight. The judge continued, "Mrs. Naomi Harper, listed as notary and witness to the forged signatures, will also face review of her professional license and possible criminal penalties." I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until it came out in a shaky exhale. My hands trembled so badly that I had to grip them together to keep them still. When the judge finished, she looked directly at me. Her expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Harper, I commend you for your courage and composure throughout this process. The court acknowledges your competence and independence in managing your affairs." Those words, your competence and independence, felt like a balm to every wound. For months, I'd been painted as confused, senile, incapable. Hearing those words restored something inside me that Daniel had tried to take away. When the gavel came down, it sounded final, almost cleansing. It was over, or so I thought. As I stood to leave, Daniel turned his head toward me for the first time. His eyes met mine, cold, hollow, and filled with something that looked like hatred mixed with regret. He didn't say anything, but I saw the accusation written on his face. "You did this to me." Callahan touched my arm gently. "Let's go," he said. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, lighter but also lonelier. Reporters were waiting near the steps, asking questions, flashing cameras. I ignored them all. I just wanted to go home, to sit in silence, to process the wreckage of what my life had become. Jeanette wrapped an arm around me as we walked to the car. "It's done," she said softly. "You're free now." "Free?" I echoed the word, tasting strange on my tongue. Because yes, I had won. But freedom didn't feel like victory, it felt like grief. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the court documents resting on the coffee table beside me. The silence was deafening. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was exhaustion. Daniel was facing charges, my assets were secure, and Naomi had lost her notary license. But none of it felt like justice. Justice couldn't bring back the son I'd lost, not to death, but to greed and pride. I went to the mantel where Thomas's photo sat. I ran my fingers over the glass. "It's over, Thomas," I whispered. "But I don't know how to feel. I protected what you built, but I couldn't protect our boy." Tears blurred my vision. For the first time since the ordeal began, I let myself cry, really cry. The kind of deep, broken sobs that come from somewhere buried far beneath the surface. Jeanette called later that night to check on me. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "I won the case, but I lost everything that mattered." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't lose everything, Marlene. You still have yourself. And that's more than what he tried to take." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. I looked around the house, the same walls, the same furniture, but everything felt different now. I had taken back my freedom, but the price had been my family. I had won the battle, but I'd lost my son. After the trial, silence became my closest companion. The first few mornings after the verdict were the hardest. I would wake up expecting to hear Thomas in the kitchen, humming the same tune he always did while making coffee. Then, I'd remember he was gone. And so, in a very different way, was Daniel. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, felt cavernous and cold. Jeanette insisted on staying with me for the first week after I moved back home. She said it wasn't safe for me to be alone just yet, but I think she also didn't want me to drown in the quiet. Every room seemed to hold a memory, Daniel's childhood drawings still tucked into a drawer, Thomas's old toolbox in the garage, the faint smell of cedar from his clothes in the closet. It was unbearable at first. I kept busy, or tried to. I spent hours cleaning, reorganizing, and going through old boxes of papers, determined to reclaim my space. Mr. Callahan helped me reestablish control of all my accounts and set up new safeguards. Every time I logged in, I saw my name alone on those documents, and though it brought a small flicker of pride, it was also a reminder of what I had lost. At Callahan's suggestion, I started seeing a therapist. I didn't think I needed one at first. I told myself I just had to move on, but after the first session, I realized how much pain I'd been carrying. My therapist, Dr. Klein, was patient and kind. She called what I'd experienced financial abuse, a term that felt clinical, too small for the devastation it described. But she helped me understand that trauma wasn't only physical, it was emotional too. "It's not weakness to feel broken," she told me during one session. "It's proof that you cared deeply." I nodded, trying to believe her. As the weeks went by, I began to find a strange rhythm again. I cooked small meals, took walks in the garden, and sometimes even went to the farmer's market with Jeanette on Saturdays. Slowly, life returned to the edges of my grief, like sunlight creeping in through a half-closed curtain. One afternoon, while going through Thomas's old office, I found a notebook filled with his handwriting. It wasn't financial records this time, it was letters. He had been writing to me without ever intending to send them. In one of them, he wrote, "If anything happens to me, remember that strength doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it just means standing when the world tries to knock you down." I pressed the notebook to my chest and cried for what felt like hours. That evening, I called Callahan and thanked him for everything. He chuckled gently. "You don't owe me thanks, Marlene. I just did my job. You did the hard part." I thought about that after hanging up. He was right. I had fought not just in court but in spirit. I had stood against manipulation, fear, and guilt, and I had survived. Still, something inside me ached that no verdict could fix. I missed my son. Despite everything, I still loved him. That love hadn't disappeared. It had just changed, become something fragile, bittersweet, and painful. After weeks of debate, I sat down one night and wrote him a letter. My hand shook as I began. "Dear Daniel," I wrote, "I don't know if you'll ever understand how much your actions hurt me. But I need you to know that despite everything, you are still my son. I will always love you, but love does not mean forgetting. It means wishing you healing, even from afar." I told him about the trial, about how I hoped he'd take responsibility, and that maybe one day we could speak again if honesty ever returned between us. I ended it simply, "I forgive you in pieces. Maybe one day those pieces will fit together." When I finished, I sealed the envelope and mailed it to the detention center where he was being held. For weeks, I heard nothing. Every day I checked the mail, half hoping, half dreading a response. But none came. At first, I took his silence as rejection, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. But Dr. Klein reminded me that healing rarely looks like reconciliation. Forgiveness, she said, isn't something you do for him, it's something you do for yourself. Her words helped. Little by little, I began rebuilding my identity not as a widow or a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her independence. I started attending financial literacy workshops for widows, speaking quietly in the back at first, then more confidently each time. People began asking me questions, wanting advice, and I realized that sharing my story gave others strength too. Jeanette joked one afternoon, "You're turning into an advocate without even trying." I laughed softly. Maybe that's how Thomas would have wanted it. Months passed, and the seasons changed. The garden bloomed again, and with it, a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I still had bad days, days when the silence felt too heavy, when I wondered what Daniel was doing, whether he hated me or missed me, but I was learning that pain didn't have to define me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on the porch and stare at the stars. I'd think about Thomas, about Daniel, about how fragile love could be and how much strength it took to rebuild after it broke. And in those moments, I would whisper a quiet promise to myself that no matter what happened, I would keep moving forward. I realized forgiveness might take years, if it ever came at all. Months later, something unexpected arrived in my mailbox. It was a plain white envelope, no return address, the handwriting shaky and unfamiliar. For a moment, I thought it was another bill or some leftover legal notice. But when I looked closer, my breath caught it was addressed in Daniel's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in months, not since the trial. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, written in pen, the ink smudged in places as though he'd hesitated or wiped away tears. I sat down at the kitchen table, the afternoon sunlight slanting through the blinds, and began to read. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. Not after everything I did. I don't even forgive myself yet. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." I paused, staring at the words until they blurred. My throat tightened. I kept reading. Naomi left. I don't blame her. She said she couldn't handle what I'd become. I can't either. I've been doing therapy sessions here in prison. They make me talk about things I never wanted to face: Dad's death, my debts, the way I tried to control everything because I was terrified of losing it all. But I see now that I didn't just lose control. I lost myself. And I hurt you more than anyone ever should. By the time I finished reading, tears had already fallen onto the page. I set the letter down and pressed my fingers to my lips, whispering, "Oh, Daniel." For months, I had prayed for some kind of closure. Not because I needed an apology to move on, but because I needed to believe that somewhere inside him, the boy I'd raised still existed. And now, reading his words, I felt a faint flicker of that boy again. Jeanette found me sitting at the table, the letter clutched in my hands. "Is it from him?" she asked softly. I nodded. "He said he's sorry." She sat across from me. "Do you believe him?" I thought about it. I think I want to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept rereading the letter until the words started to sink into me, not just as an apology, but as a bridge. A fragile, trembling bridge between what we'd lost and what might still be salvaged. The next morning, I called Mr. Callahan and asked how I could visit Daniel. He gave me the details, and 2 weeks later, I found myself driving to the state correctional facility. The sky was gray that day, just like the day of the verdict. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. When I arrived, the guard led me through a long hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. My heart pounded with every step. I sat down at the visitor's table, the cold surface gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. For a moment, I almost turned back. I didn't know what I'd say, or how I'd look him in the eye after everything that had happened. Then the door opened. Daniel walked in, wearing a standard-issue uniform, his shoulders hunched, his face thinner, older. He looked nothing like the confident man who had once tried to control everything. He looked small, broken but human. When his eyes met mine, they filled with tears immediately. "Hi, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. I swallowed hard. "Hi, Daniel." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence. Stretched, heavy but not hostile, just full of everything that had gone unsaid. Finally, he looked down at his hands. "You shouldn't have come." "Yes, I should have," I said gently. "You wrote to me. You reached out. I didn't think you'd want to see me after what I did." I hesitated. I didn't know if I did either. He looked up then, eyes red and wet. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I know sorry isn't enough, but I need you to hear it from me, not from paper." I nodded slowly. "I hear you." He started talking then, really talking. About the pressure he'd been under, the debts he'd tried to hide, how Naomi had manipulated him with guilt and fear, convincing him that he deserved control over the family estate. He admitted that he'd felt ashamed, trapped, and desperate. "I thought if I could fix it all before you found out, maybe you'd be proud of me again," he said. "But instead, I destroyed the one person who loved me unconditionally." His words broke something in me. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he gripped my hand tightly, his body shaking with quiet sobs. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I said softly. "But I do still love you." He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "That's more than I deserve." The guard announced we had 5 minutes left. Daniel wiped his face and tried to smile. "I'll make things right, Mom. Somehow. I'll pay back everything I owe. And when I get out, I want to start over. I want to be someone you're proud of again." I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness. Not yet, but hope. Fragile, trembling hope. When the visit ended, he stood and whispered, "Thank you for coming." As I walked toward the exit, I turned back one last time. He was still standing there, watching me through the glass, his hand pressed against it. I pressed mine to the same spot, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel hate or fear, just love, bruised but still alive. Outside, the clouds began to part, letting thin streams of sunlight break through. I took a deep breath of cool air and felt lighter than I had in months. As I left the facility, for the first time, I felt a faint glimmer of peace. People say betrayal from family is the worst pain, and now I know why. In the months that followed my visit with Daniel, I tried to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of purpose. It's strange how grief and betrayal can leave you hollow, yet somehow open new spaces for growth you never expected. I'd spent so long surviving that I'd forgotten what it meant to simply live. But slowly, that began to change. Word about my case spread through town. At first, I was embarrassed. I hated the idea that everyone knew my son had taken me to court, that my private heartbreak had become gossip. But something surprising happened. One afternoon, while I was grocery shopping, an elderly woman approached me. Her name was Darlene, and she said softly, "You don't know me, but I followed your story. My nephew's been doing the same thing to me, trying to take over my finances. Hearing what you did gave me the courage to call a lawyer." Her words stunned me. For the first time, I realized my story wasn't just tragedy, it was testimony. After that, more people came forward. Some called, others wrote letters. They weren't all elderly women. Some were widowers, single mothers, even younger adults who'd been manipulated by family into giving up control of their money. Their stories echoed mine, different faces, same wounds. I started to understand that what had happened to me was part of something bigger. With Callahan's encouragement, I decided to do something meaningful. Together, we established a small foundation in Thomas's name, the Harper Trust Initiative. Its goal was simple: help vulnerable people, especially the widows and seniors, understand their legal and financial rights before someone could take advantage of them. I used the settlement funds Daniel had returned to finance the startup. It felt poetic in a way, transforming something born of deceit into a force for protection. At first, I wasn't sure I could handle public speaking. The thought of standing in front of strangers made me nervous. But when I gave my first talk at the local community center, the words came easily. "I'm not here because I'm strong," I told the audience. "I'm here because I learned what happens when you stay silent. Love doesn't mean blindness, trust doesn't mean surrender. And no one, not even your own child, has the right to take your independence." The room was quiet when I finished. Then, one by one, people began to clap. A woman in the front row wiped away tears. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: pride. Jeanette came up to me afterward, grinning from ear to ear. "You were incredible," she said. "You've found your voice again." "Maybe," I said with a small smile. "Or maybe I'm just finally using it for the right reasons." The foundation grew faster than I expected. We partnered with local banks, senior centers, and legal aid groups. Callahan volunteered his time to host free workshops on estate planning and fraud prevention. The more we did, the more I realized how many people lived in quiet fear of being taken advantage of by those they loved. Through all this, I still thought about Daniel. He wrote occasionally from prison, short letters, more measured than before. He talked about the rehabilitation program he was attending, about working in the prison library, about trying to understand what real responsibility meant. I never stopped writing back. Our letters were cautious but honest. Healing, I learned, isn't a straight line, it's a slow climb out of darkness. As the 1-year mark of the verdict approached, I visited Thomas's grave. The air was crisp, the sky painted in soft hues of gold and gray. I brought a single sunflower, his favorite, and placed it beside his headstone. "I think you'd be proud of me," I whispered. I finally found my strength. The wind rustled through the trees, gentle but steady, like a quiet affirmation. In the weeks that followed, I began planning the Foundation's next event, a workshop series for families learning to rebuild trust after financial betrayal. I wanted to show others that love could survive even the deepest wounds, if both sides were willing to change. Around that time, I got a letter from Daniel's lawyer informing me that he had been granted early release for good behavior and cooperation with investigators. The news stirred a complex mix of emotions: relief, fear, uncertainty. I wasn't sure I was ready to see him again, but I knew the moment would come eventually. "Doctor," Klein told me, "you can prepare your boundaries without building walls. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means living without the wound controlling you." Her words stayed with me. I began to hope, cautiously, that Daniel's remorse was real and lasting. One evening, while reviewing some of the Foundation's materials, I caught myself smiling. Not the strained, polite kind I'd worn for months, but a real one. I realized I wasn't living in reaction to the past anymore. I was living for the future. Yes, the scars were still there. Some nights, I still woke from dreams where Daniel was shouting at me through a locked door, or where I found the missing will again and again. But those dreams no longer ruled me. They were echoes, reminders of a chapter I had survived. As I watched the sunset from my porch that night, the light spilling over the horizon in soft orange tones, I thought about how pain had changed me. It had hardened me in some ways, yes, but it had also softened me toward others. I understood things now that I hadn't before. That strength isn't the absence of pain, and that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means deciding to stop carrying the burden alone. But deep down, I knew some wounds never fully close, they just stop bleeding. It's been 3 years since that nightmare began, and I'm finally at peace with the outcome. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, though the scars remain. 3 years ago, I was a woman shattered by betrayal, defined by grief and loss. Today, I'm someone new. Not the same Marlene who depended on others to make decisions or who confused control with love, but someone who has learned that independence isn't loneliness. It's freedom. The Harper Trust Initiative has grown beyond anything I imagined. What began as a few community workshops has now become a statewide program, partnering with legal aid groups and financial educators. We even host annual conferences where survivors share their stories. Every time I stand on stage, I still feel nervous. But when I look into the faces of those listening faces full of hope and fear, I remember why I started. Jeanette, of course, has been by my side through it all. She jokes that she's my unpaid manager, keeping track of calls and helping organize events. Sometimes, after a long day of meetings, we sit on my porch with tea and laugh about how two women in their 60s somehow became advocates without even trying. One warm afternoon, I received a call from a number I hadn't seen in a long time. It was Daniel. He had been out of prison for 6 months now. His voice was quiet, steady. "Hi, Mom," he said. "I wanted to let you know I've been working at a community rehab center. I'm helping with financial literacy classes for ex-inmates. They even asked me to share my story." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt tears gathering in my eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of something gentler. "That's good, Daniel," I said softly. "That's really good." He hesitated before asking, "Can I come by sometime, just to talk?" It took me a moment to answer. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, but another part, the one still cautious, still guarding the fragile peace I'd built, knew I needed to set boundaries. "We can start with lunch," I said finally. "Public place, somewhere quiet." "Of course," he said quickly. "Whatever you're comfortable with." When we met a week later, I barely recognized him. Gone was the arrogance, the sharpness that used to fill every word. He looked older, calmer. His hands shook slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. "I didn't think you'd actually come," he said. "I wasn't sure I would," I admitted, "but I wanted to see you." The conversation was awkward at first. We talked about small things, his work, Jeanette's garden, the new programs I'd launched. But eventually, silence settled, and with it came honesty. "I still think about what I did," he said quietly. "Every day. The way I treated you. I hate myself for it." "You don't need to hate yourself forever," I replied. "You just need to keep doing better." He nodded, looking down. "I'm trying. I haven't touched a cent that doesn't belong to me since I got out. I even pay my debts little by little. I want to make things right." I smiled faintly. "You can't undo the past, Daniel. But you can honor it by not repeating it." For the first time in years, we talked without anger or accusation. It wasn't the warm, easy conversation of a mother and son who had never broken each other's hearts, but it was a start. After lunch, we walked outside. The air smelled of rain and fresh grass. Daniel turned to me and said, "I don't expect us to ever go back to how things were. But if we can at least have coffee sometimes, I'd like that." I nodded. So would I. That night, as I sat on my porch, I thought about everything that had led me here. The pain, the fear, the endless nights wondering if I could ever recover. And now, here I was watching the sunset, feeling something I hadn't in a very long time. Peace. I visit Thomas's grave every few months. Each time I bring him a sunflower and tell him about what's changed the foundation, Jeanette's never-ending jokes, Daniel's progress. I tell him how his wisdom saved me, even when I thought I couldn't go on. Sometimes I still hear Daniel's words from that awful day, "It's our money now." But they don't pierce me anymore. They remind me of how far I've come. They remind me of what I've learned, that love without boundaries becomes sacrifice, and that real strength sometimes looks like letting go. When I look back, I realize that everything, the betrayal, the court battles, the heartbreak, became part of a much larger story. A story of resilience, of rediscovering who I am when everything I depended on crumbled. The truth is, I didn't just win a legal fight. I reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my ability to trust again, not in others, but in myself. Now, whenever I meet someone who feels trapped, afraid, or broken by betrayal, I tell them this: you can survive anything, as long as you don't stop believing that you're worth protecting. The sun was setting when Jeanette joined me on the porch that evening, handing me a cup of tea. "You've come full circle," she said, smiling. I nodded, watching the horizon turn gold and pink. "I guess I have." We sat in comfortable silence, the sound of crickets rising in the background. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of loss or the weight of what had happened. I just felt grateful, grateful for peace, for friendship, for the strength that comes after the storm. And as I look at the sunset from my porch, I finally know the difference between love and control.